Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. Congratulations and pat yourselves on the back. You made it to Friday, which means it's finally the weekend. And I hope that you guys have had a safe and wonderful week, prosperous week, in whatever endeavors that you're currently undergoing right now. And I hope, of course, that your friends and your family and you are safe. And if not, I do really hope you find that safety and security in the very near future. There's a lot of stuff that's obviously happening around the world right now, and especially inside of Ukraine. We have a lot of big developments that's been happening today, a lot of very important things that have occurred throughout the world. There's a lot of big developments in other parts of the world too. Of course, we have follow-ups with what's going on when it comes to Taiwan, which is on everyone's mind, but there's been a lot of incidents in the Middle East too that need to be talked about, as well as in Europe. So a lot of big stuff happening, a lot of really cool, interesting stuff, some of it that we have later on at the end of the stream, but it's mostly a lot of usually bad stuff. When we're talking about big, important, breaking things in news, usually it doesn't mean the scientific advancements, it usually means the opposite end of the spectrum. And that is war, death, famine, drought, pestilence, the whole 9 yards. But likely, you guys have allowed us to be able to help. And that's because here at the New News, we are the news that gives back. And the way we're able to do that is through you guys as the community. There's a ton of different links that we have in our description. We're constantly looking for more, so please jump on our Discord and send us some more, please. I really would love to spend my entire weekend just vetting organizations, so please jump on our Discord, let a staff member know if you have anything to add to those. We want to fill up all 5,000 characters of our description actually with just links for humanitarian organizations. But you'll see some for a whole different bunch of parts of the world. We have some for Somalia, Ethiopia. Of course, we have plenty of them for Ukraine, and we have a bunch with other stuff that's going on, throughout the world at this point. And so we're constantly looking to add to that list. So please help us do so. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's perfectly fine. We are never going to do super chats on this channel. We're never going to be doing, any kind of merchandising on this channel. Some people have tossed around that 100%, like 100% of all profit goes to charity kind of merchandising. I still don't feel comfortable about that. To be honest, I want as much money going to helping people as we can. So, not really intending to do that at this point, but we're never going to be pushing that kind of stuff. So the way we are able to give back and have a bigger impact is by growing this community. So once again, if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's fine. Give us a like and subscribe and let your friends know about us. Ultimately, the more people that see these videos, that join us here at our community, the more good and much more of an impact we will have overall as a community. We want to be able to put fundraisers directly onto these streams, and the only way we're going to be able to do that is to continue to grow. So thank you guys for supporting us so far in our endeavor. It's been a wonderful, was this 102 episodes now? And then now, it's been a wonderful time talking to you guys. A lot of really great people in this community, and I couldn't be happier with what we're doing. So thank you guys for supporting us. Even more of a thank you for supporting the organizations below. And without further ado, we have a ton of stuff to get into, so we're going to dive right into what is happening with, of course, Ukraine. Ukraine is the special report of the night and has been since we begun. I really am looking forward to, at some point, being able to move on to something else, because I really do not enjoy reporting on all of the death and destruction that is inside of Ukraine. I really want this war to end, much like everyone else does. Up here in the northern part of the Kyiv Oblast, somewhere here, another individual, someone who was murdered and then disposed of by Russian troops, Russian occupational troops in this area several months ago. The remains have been found inside of a well. It's a technical well at this point. So pretty terrible, to say the least. But they have removed that. So far, in total, 1,348 people have been found. 300 are still reportedly missing. Over here in Kyiv, the head of Amnesty International within Ukraine has resigned. Amnesty International is coming under some they're getting a lot of backlash. Basically, so Oksana Polkaluchik, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that terribly, who is the head of the Amnesty International of Ukraine, decided to resign over disagreements with the Amnesty's leadership. If you don't live in a country that's being torn apart, you'll never understand what it means to blame the army of its defenders. Amnesty International has been the target of a lot of criticism from within inside of Ukraine itself in recent days for reporting for their report blaming Ukrainian forces for endangering civilians by operating in populated areas. According to their logic, if the Ukrainian army positioned itself in an open field or gave up, it would have been better. In contrast, they have failed to write anything on Russian war crimes in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, Kharkiv, and so on, under the excuse that they need to keep neutrality because they have an office with employees in Russia. And even Dmytro Kuleba, who is the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, ended up commenting on this. Apparently at Amnesty, so regarding Amnesty International, which we do follow, the Secretary General calls me a mob or a troll, and this won't stop me from saying that its report distorts reality, draws false moral equivalences between the aggressor and the victim, and boosts Russia's disinformation efforts. This is fake neutrality, not truthfulness. And that's coming from the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine. So a very good criticism article was located here. We have a good tweet here. And it's just breaking up. It went through each of these arguments and just destroyed Amnesty International at this. This Amnesty International, up until this point, has had controversy, but in general, it's been an overall good organization. To see something like this come out is really going to undercut their credibility on the international stage when it comes to human rights endeavors. And if you want to know what looking at what endangerment of civilians looks like, so that's how endangering civilians really looks like, as opposed to what Amnesty described in the report. 12 Russian military vehicles parked near residential buildings in Bucha on March 24th. Ukrainian forces didn't attack the place to keep the civilians safe. And of course they've gone through and they've counted up all the Russian military vehicles. In fact, Russian Federation has been pretty notorious throughout the entire war of not just targeting civilians, but conducting horrendous reprisals. I mean horrendous reprisals. They have blockaded and starved out and murdered thousands and thousands and thousands of Ukrainians. I do not mean that people unfortunately became collateral damage of war. I do not mean, that unfortunately civilians have been killed, because war is a terrible thing and civilians do die in war. No, I mean that they have literally been targeted and murdered by Russian troops, quite openly, and very aggressively. The war crimes on the counts of the Russians is tremendous. It's insane just to try and think of the level of war crimes. I think the only thing that could obscure at this point what has happened to Ukraine is likely I'd probably have to say the Holocaust for at least Europe. Is about the next worst thing war crimes wise to have happened in Europe, at least in my recollection, on the spot. So pretty terrible, and and for an organization something like this to do that is pretty terrible. Now, is Ukraine conducting war crimes, or has Ukrainian troops committed war crimes? Yeah, 100%. I will 100% guarantee you right here, right now, without falter, that Ukrainian troops in some capacity, somewhere, have committed war crimes. Without a doubt. If there is a war, if there is a conflict, war crimes are going to occur. Without a doubt, on both sides, war crimes will occur. Hands down, will happen. I will be very open and willing to admit that. I will be willing to admit there's probably several dozen instances in which Ukrainian troops have committed war crimes. If not more. I'm sure. But when you compare level of war crimes from Ukrainians to level of war crimes by Russians, which are currently fitting most of the requirements of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity, as we actually read on the UN website yesterday, yeah, That's apples to oranges. Apples to oranges. As we move on, child casualties are still rising in Ukraine. We talked about the missing kids. Thus far, there's over 200 missing children inside of Ukraine, and we know of several thousand more which have been deported, over 5,000, closing in on 6,000 children which have been deported forcefully by the Russian Federation. And, of course, we get yet another update from the Prosecutor General's office. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 359 Ukrainian children have died and 700 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk region. Yet another terrifying statistic. So we move over here into Kharkiv as we slowly make our way down into the Donbass. We have a couple of different updates. First of all, the Russian shelling continues. Quote, rocket attacks in Kharkiv region on August 5th. 2 men and 1 woman were injured. Local residential buildings, shops, a market, and educational establishment were damaged. That's coming from Ole Simonov, who is the head of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration. But this was quickly followed up, once again, by the deputy head of the president's office, which is Kirilo Timoshenko, who says, quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian troops have damaged 9,826 critical infrastructure objects in the Kharkiv region. That is the Kharkiv region alone. That is, you as a civilian, there is no, like, semi-normality to return to. Because that means electricity is out. That means water is out. That means plumbing is out. And sewage. And gas and everything that you need, like everything that as a person you need to live a modern life in a modern nation has pretty much been either damaged or destroyed, and that's going to take an immense amount of time and money to repair even after the war is over, and the war isn't over yet. As we continue down the front, I actually jump down here. This is still in the Kharkiv Oblast right here in the kind of the Izium area, and this is the village of Dniprovna, which, quote, the armed forces of Ukraine have liberated the village of Dniprovna in the Kharkiv region from Russian occupiers, and that's coming from the press service of the 93rd Separate Mechanized Brigade, also known as the Kholodny Yar. We do know that the 93rd Mechanized Brigade is operating up in this kind of area in the Izium sector of the front. We've seen them operating pretty heavily throughout the Luhansk and the Donetsk Oblast here, kind of in this northern pocket. But the main and supporting efforts of the southern parts of the front have now shown themselves. As of today, we have 2 different points in which Russian forces are on the offensive that we are aware of. First of all, we jump up here into Seversk. Seversk has seen quite a bit of some activity, just not a whole lot that we can actually have proof of, if that makes sense. A lot of statements, a lot of minor statements from individuals, but nothing too concrete. It's been relatively quiet within this region, but Russian troops are conducting a minor offensive within this area, which at this point I am going to be labeling as a supporting effort by Russian forces within this area of the front lines. The reason why is it's not along an axis of advance, it's right here in the northern part of the pocket. This would mean that trying to take Seversk, as we have a video of today, where we're starting to see the damage of the attacks on Seversk at this point, what this could mean is the main efforts that the Russians are going to conduct is against Bakhmut and Toretsk in the south, with Slavyansk and Kramatorsk in the north. Those are your 2 main efforts. That's where the main body of Russian forces is going to be, and that's where the main battles are going to be taking place. However, the Russians also, you don't want to allow for the Ukrainian troops. If you're a Russian commander, you do not want Ukrainian troops just all bunched up around Slavyansk and Kramatorsk and Bakhmut. No. You want to put pressure on them in other locations. We saw this tactic on 9 different axes within the Luhansk Oblast, which worked to a great effect. And now that's kind of what we're going to see here. That you break these things down into a main and supporting effort. Your main effort is what you're is the main objective, the strategic point that you're trying to take. Supporting efforts mean that if Ukraine does not shift troops over here to Seversk, they will lose Seversk, and that will also open up a gap in their line that the Russians could possibly use to exploit and turn into a main effort if they find that target of opportunity. So that now forces Ukrainian troops that could otherwise be used to be defending Bakhmut, Soledar, Toretsk, or Slavyansk, and they now have to redirect over here to Seversk. And that's all that means. But we can take a look here at some of the damage that Seversk has taken just in the last roughly 24 hours.
Вот это вот уебало сегодня ночью. Одна. Вот вторая.
А как их вызвали? Зарплату-то не платили, они бы и уехали. Это у людей.
So as you can see, pretty large amounts of ordnance that are being dropped onto the city. I mean, you can't even tell if that's a road or what's going on there. But we do know that according to the locals, that Russian forces are attempting to actually push and take the city. And just take a look, as we zoom out of the map real quick, just take a look at the amount of activity in this area. And this is why we can safely say that today, this is really the beginning of the BAKHMUT offensive. And we'll get to that here in just a second. But we're going to jump over here into Luhansk. We're seeing nighttime mobilization. So reportedly, the Luhansk People's Republic, which is the basically like fake republic of the separatists, is basically a Russian puppet state within Ukraine. They have been reportedly ordered to recruit, quote unquote, 7,000 new troops by September the 1st. What does this mean? Well, since it's technically not Russia, they can conscript forcefully. And we see that here. This is a nighttime mobilization effort and arrests that are being conducted within the city of Luhansk. And you'll see them forcefully taking men and putting them into service. We have for quite some time. But we will probably see an uptick in this. The reason why they need that many troops is a lack of manpower. Every single vehicle that has been lost, relatively, you can safely say that it's a loss of troops. I mean, those things need crew. They need guys in the back, your infantry that are riding along with it. Pretty severe losses overall. And so it's, so they got to make up for it somehow. We know that the Russians are suffering from a manpower shortage. But as what's happening in Bakhmut has begun, and that offensive has begun, what we're starting to see is a surge of forces. And what that means is that an offensive has begun, or is beginning, or is ready to begin, and they are taking the troops that they have in reserve, and they are now pushing them into active combat to the front to, basically redouble their forces in an area. We see this with Russian VDV forces, or Russian paratroopers, that are pushing through Alchevsk. The reason we can identify them as the VDV is because their use of BMDs, which is a VDV vehicle. It's purposely built in order to be able to be stored on an aircraft. They actually, their suspension systems actually collapse, which collapse down the tracks and can actually be transported via aircraft as a light infantry support vehicle and light armored vehicles with VDV forces behind enemy lines. So that is how we have identified them, but just take a look. And so, as we continue here with Alchevsko, obviously we got some troops being surged into the fray at this point, and we will continue to probably see a lot more of that in the next coming days. But we jump over here up into Popasna, where maybe Amnesty International should be actually investigating the Russians. I'm not actually going to show any of this, like actual video or photography wise or any of that, because it's pretty horrific. The Russians, they took a Ukrainian POW and they mutilated him. They cut his head off and they cut his hands off and they stuck them on pikes outside of a home in Popasna. It's been geolocated. Photographs and the video evidence are there. You can go and you can check it out. We have this on our website. We have the maps on our website. You can go and click through all of these links yourselves. It's important to see, but I'm not going to show it on a stream. So, yeah. If your discretion advised on that. As we move over here into the BAKHMUT area, now we start getting into the actual offensive actions and what's been happening. Now, there have been offensive actions that have occurred up until this point that have failed. The Ukrainians have actually pushed them back. But the thing is that we're seeing a renewed offensive and a much larger offensive, not just in Solidar or specific little points. It's not really company-sized attacks, but actual battalion-sized attacks, which we would expect in a major offensive. And they are taking very heavy losses. We know that there's very heavy fighting outside of Bakhmut in this region right now. The information isn't all clear at this point. It's a very fluid situation. As I have said, when the beginning of the Donbass campaign began, I specifically stated, hey, like we as like a news channel are trying to get independent news. We're not always going to be able to report everything accurately the first time because the guys there barely know what the hell is going on. It's difficult enough in that situation, let alone for somebody who's not in that country. You have to understand, even like us as a team, we have to understand our limitations and the fog of war and the limited capacity that we have being so far from the front lines. And even if we did have people on the front lines right now, that the information would be distorted. It would not always be accurate. I had this myself when I was in the military and when I was overseas. And and so I can't imagine that everything is going to be perfect here. We do make corrections, but bear with it whenever these major offensives are going on. There's a lot of information to try and go through. A lot of it is not necessarily true, or it's distorted facts, and we try to make those corrections going on. But as of right now, this is the main effort. This is along a line of axis of advance for the Russians. And we're starting to see where they're taking pretty heavy casualties as a result of trying to move through and take this. As you can see by these burned out BMPs, these are Russian forces moving here on the front lines. I mean, they're totally trashed. Most of their armor is restricted to just using roadways, making them very easy targets. As we can see, they're just rolling through just completely bombed out towns from those precursor bombardments we've been watching over the last, I'd say, about 3 weeks to a month. So, Riley has said, why is no one getting involved after this? You would think that after seeing these atrocities, other people would start getting involved to end this war. That's the thing. And please do ask questions if you guys would like. I do answer them throughout the stream. A lot of this is complicated, but I try to dumb it down the best I can, answer your stuff as best I can. But why is no one getting involved? Well, because generally speaking, it's very difficult to sell the idea of sending your child or your citizens to die for a war that does not involve their national security directly. While the rhetoric is there for the war to, spill over into other areas, whether that be Poland or NATO in general, because Poland is part of NATO and that would trigger on Article 5. We're talking about extensions in the war in other locations, Moldova, for instance. You're not going to probably see ground troops of another nation roll into this. Because the same reason why fighting in Vietnam turned against public opinion, the same reason why fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq was a poor idea for public opinion, the same reason that the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan failed due to public opinion in one of the most repressed states in history, is because the idea of selling, of literally sending people to die in a war that ultimately win or lose, does it truly affect you as a country within your borders? And, that's a very easy morality thing to say as a third person, as an individual. We're not politicians here. I am just a guy on the internet that's reporting the news and trying to raise money for charity. Ultimately, that's all that we are doing. But you have to think of it from a leadership point of view. Why did it take, why did it take until 1917 for the United States to go into war for World War I? Why did it take the United States to be attacked during World War II at Pearl Harbor for the United States to enter the war? And for the most part, well knowing that concentration camps and atrocities were occurring. Europe had fallen. Europe had already fallen. North Africa had fallen. Most of the Pacific ended up falling. Why does it take so much? Why did Chamberlain conduct appeasement and literally give up the entirety of Czechoslovakia essentially to Hitler, knowing what was happening? And why did the Allies, who immediately following the end of World War II, not end up going to war to kill each other immediately following the greatest, the largest war in human history, while they had all of their troops already there to do so? Because it's difficult to get people behind the idea of sending their own people to die in somebody else's war. Russia didn't invade Poland. And while as much as some of the Poles would love to go and, fight and declare war on Russia, they won't. Because ultimately, the Russians aren't invading Poland. Again, they're invading Ukraine. Why will the Americans not go into this conflict? It's not necessarily just because of nuclear weapons. Most of it is just because, everyone knows that nuclear weapons probably, no one wins that fight. And the one thing that people like more than winning the fight is staying in power. Nuclear weapons is how you lose your power. Look at the Iranians in 2020. They didn't even kill any Americans. They launched missiles at some bases. They hit empty spots on those bases purposefully. And now, look at that. The United States doesn't invade Iran and immediately destroy the Ayatollah and the entire government and enter itself into another anti-insurgency campaign. Iran would love to kill Americans. They've trained a lot of people to do so. That's all that Kataib Hezbollah is there for. That's all that the Mahdi army is there for. There's 70,000 Iranian fighters. As of 2017, there were 70,000 Iranian fighters inside of Syria, specifically there to kill Americans in the coalition. But Iran will not send their troops. They will not fire missiles from their territory. Because if they do, they lose their power. Now, so that's why no one is interested in fighting Russia. That's one of the major reasons why no one's interested in fighting Russia, because it would divulge into a nuclear conflict. But more so, why should we if it's not our blood being spilt, if it's not our country? And it's not a citizen's duty to necessarily understand that, because we feel a certain way. You're here on this channel because you feel a certain way about what is happening. And that's fine. I'm there with you. I back Ukraine 100%. But as the President of the United States, it would be very difficult for me to sign the order that literally kills thousands of Americans. That would be very difficult. That could possibly end most of the civilized world in a nuclear fire. That would be very difficult. And that's what would happen if you were if you were in any country in Europe or in the world. No matter how bad the atrocities are, they're not happening in your country. As we continue on here with the BAKHMUT campaign, we get more and more photos of what's happening. Of course, IZ is there. Oh man, these idiots. IZ is a Russian state-run media news channel, but they are there on the front lines, quote unquote. They're close enough to the fighting to say they are, but they're not really. They're kind of both the rear echelon troops, but we're seeing these troops moving on the axis of advance here. Yes, 100% show your range tables, you idiots. And this is inside of a self-propelled gun. I think this is a 2S3. It's not this. This is an MTLB, but pretty sure this is a 2S3 interior. But yeah, you idiots, show your range tables and all that you're doing. But yes, the offensive has begun in the BAKHMUT area.
Сегодня прятаться в укрытиях или, например, на территории заброшенной промзоны приходится чаще обычного, потому что артиллерия Украины не смолкает ни на минуту. Начали они работать рано утром и продолжают сейчас.
Yes, he's going to sit there and he's going to talk for 30 seconds somewhere not close enough to the front lines to matter. We get the daily Donetsk update, of course, which we get every single day of the last 24 hours of what has happened inside the Donetsk Oblast. And this is coming from Pavel Korolenko, who is the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. He says, quote, Russian aggressors fired missiles at the Donetsk region on August the 4th. 8 people were killed and 9 citizens were injured. But there are successful strikes here in Donetsk on the Ukrainian side. The quote, the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed 2 Russian self-propelled artillery units, Akitsia, in the Donetsk region. That's coming from the press service of the 43rd Separate Artillery Brigade, named after Hetman Taras Triaslo. And then here is some very good investigative work. Now, you may remember that there was a Ukrainian POW who was castrated and then executed. And this happened at the same time about as the massacre at Olenivka. Well, the internet is a very amazing community as a whole. There are some pretty sick things on it, but as a whole, the internet is pretty amazing in what it can do. And here, Bellingcat investigators geolocated the execution site and found the identity of the men performing the execution and the castration. And the individual that actually conducted this and was the main perpetrator in this, his name is Ashur Shuj Mangush, who was born in 1993, and he's a mercenary from the BAKHMUT battalion, which is a Chechnyan mercenary battalion and is a wing of the Wagner group. And Bellingcat has released an entire thing regarding it. There's a lot of disturbing content on here, so please be careful when you're going through this. But this is Bellingcat, and they have actually identified what has happened in the mutilation of that. And that is the individual. That sick, twisted fuck. As we continue southbound, we roll into Mariupol, which we have several different updates for. First of all, of course, we have more images of individuals actually going and lining up for drinking water, because there isn't any drinking water in Mariupol. I guess the Russians finally figured out that if they barely keep these people alive, and they don't kill off the entire population, they would be better, because if the population dies off, then no one's there to clear the rubble but them, and they really don't feel like doing that. Lovely. There's now been a very sharp jump in infectious disease, and it's being rather recorded. There are bodies of dead people who are still being found right in the middle of the streets, essentially. So it's a pretty terrible situation overall. There has been a lot of disease running rampant. Cholera is a really big problem. There is no there is nothing in Mariupol. Mariupol just doesn't exist. Like, we could erase it off of a map now. It would be just as effective as what the Russians have done, is erasing it off of the map. Mariupol, there is no housing. There is no humanitarian aid. Your drinking water is tainted. You may get some from the Russians. That's a big maybe, as we just saw in a photo. But it's not nearly enough to keep you alive for very long. They are slowly starving to death. They have nothing. They have no possessions. Many of them are living outdoors. There are bodies laying everywhere that are rotting and decomposing in the mid-August sun, that have been there for months. And when you're laying there for that long, you just kind of turn into a puddle, which once again seeps into the water collected in these craters, which people are drinking and washing themselves with. It's terrible. It's utterly terrible. William Young says, I disagree. Let's not forget those suffering under Russian control. Their suffering cannot be forgotten. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm talking about right now. The people of Mariupol are suffering so just absolutely terribly. They are... I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you were killed by the Russians during the Battle of Mariupol, it was merciful. It was merciful. Because to have lived through the Battle of Mariupol, to be a civilian and have lived through the Battle of Mariupol, means that instead of dying because your bomb shelter collapsed on you, or because you were killed by shrapnel or an explosion, you're going to die a very slow, painful, disgusting, terrifying death. That is what it means. The death rate has in the temporarily occupied Mariupol has increased 5 times over. The city council has reported that 25% of those people admitted to a hospital die. .25% of people who make it to a hospital they make it to a hospital, they die. Meanwhile, the Russians are going to have a concert in the Azovstal. They're going to hold a rock concert in the Azovstal. I hope everyone in that photo... Sometimes I just wish everyone in that photograph would just be taken care of by Ukrainian forces. Because the atrocities that have occurred here and that are occurring throughout Ukraine are so terrible. You know, I thought after going overseas that I had seen quite a bit of stuff. You know, I'd seen it all. I thought I had seen it all. I saw a lot of, you know, casualties. You know, worked on a lot of casualties. You know, I've seen, you know, the death and destruction of war. I've seen entire towns flattened. I was wrong. I was horrifically wrong. I hadn't seen it all. Because this war and the Russian atrocities and the scale is indescribable. I cannot fathom it. It's hard to believe it, but I think the Islamic State was less ruthless than the Russians. William Young said, a dystopian hell, though, indeed. That's correct. As much as I would hate to admit it, I do believe that the Islamic State, with their caliphate and their execution and Sharia law and their targeting of a Christian population whose literal goal was jihad and genocide, I feel that the Islamic State was less ruthless than the Russians. Because the Islamic State didn't wipe out entire cities. And that's terrifying to think about. Because I really hate the Islamic State. And I've seen where they've tortured people. And I've seen what they've done firsthand. That's terrifying to think about. More successful strikes here in the south. Quote, the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed a Russian team site. Enemy ammunition depots, 4 S-300 anti-aircraft missile systems, or SAM systems, a military radar system, and a Volodka 82 caliber automatic mortar in the south of Ukraine on August 4th. That's coming from Operational Command South. Up here in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, they also shot down another helicopter. The armed forces, quote, the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed a Russian helicopter in the Zaporizhzhia region on August the 5th. That's coming from the Department of Strategic Communications of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So, yet another one shot down. We do not have any video or photo evidence of this one, so do take it with a grain of salt. I've heard a lot of aircraft being shot down, and there wasn't any proof to back it, so we're just going with the statement here. But Bakhmut got a nice present today. They got a fantastic present. In fact, it was HIMARS o'clock there in Bakhmut. Quite a bit. So HIMARS once again struck deep behind enemy lines and hit yet another Russian ammunition depot, sending it nice up in flames. Just go ahead and take a look.
Ебать! БК загорелась! БК горит! Ебать! Охуенно! Красавчики! Просто! Как это красиво, красавцы! Просто! А, это БК догорает так. На нахуй. Просто великолепно. Ой, красиво. Я чудов. Просто красота. Молодец.
So, once again, another ammunition depot has been destroyed. As we continue on here, in Berislav, yet another ammunition depot has been destroyed. Another Russian ammunition depot has reportedly been destroyed here in Berislav. And we do have some of the photos from that. Appears to have been a very successful strike. Yeah, stop putting ammunition depots near civilian populations. Jeez. Let's move over here. Ukraine prepares for a counteroffensive, and we can tell this because this is a rather large column here in the Kherson Oblast of Ukrainian T-72s. While the precursors for this counteroffensive really seem to have taken place, and there's been rumors that it is ongoing, we are seeing some footage that suggests otherwise, and that the buildup is occurring for this counteroffensive, not necessarily that it has yet officially started. But the parameters for it are definitely there. Go ahead and take a look. Quite a big column of tanks. This could possibly be the largest. If these engage a Russian BTG, this could easily be one of the largest, if not the largest tank engagement of the entire war, hands down. But Glare, who has asked, what are the biggest effects the coming winter and rainy season are going to have on the battlefield, movement of the front lines, and resupply of troops? Well, not the winter is going to have quite a major impact. Right now, it's pretty good fighting season, and you'll even see this in the Middle East. There's actually a fighting season and not fighting season in the Middle East. But here in Ukraine, it's kind of a similar thing. First of all, the rainy season for Ukraine is going to be coming here in the fall, right after the harvest, and then you're going to have all of that mud once again, that kind of Raspatissa style mud. It won't be nearly as severe as in the springtime, though. But once winter gets there, it's going to be exactly what Napoleon and the Germans found out. It's going to get cold. And when I mean cold, I mean terribly, terribly cold. And it's going to make troops' lives absolutely miserable. Wars in the wintertime usually fight at almost a standstill. There really isn't a good way to fight a war in the winter in a climate like that. There really just isn't. It really slows down the pace of combat, and it really affects troop morale when you're out there in the open, you're in the elements. Everyone likes to be in a warm house, right? You like to be in your nice warm bedroom, snuggled up underneath a blanket. But that's going to permafrost the ground, though, which is good. That permafrost is really what you need. That helps, much like now when it's dry. Tanks can actually maneuver off-road to an extent. They can actually maneuver around the fields, which actually puts it into the Russians' favor. Because the Russian doctrine is high-level maneuver warfare with motorized and mechanized forces. The Russians actually don't maintain any light infantry battalions. Everything they have is motorized or mechanized because they want high-speed maneuver warfare. It's really a doctrine designed to fight against NATO and not necessarily against Ukraine, but they are going to use that doctrine anyway. We've seen them use it pretty much textbook doctrine-wise thus far. And it failed for them miserably. They tried to use it up in Kyiv. Anything that ended up going into the mud during the Raspatissa was bogged down and ended up being abandoned once it ran out of fuel or couldn't be unstuck, including the recovery vehicles, which are very few and far between. So the elements are going to demoralize the troops, but it does make it easier for actual maneuver warfare. The mean winter, or the average winter for Ukraine between December and March, the temperatures in Ukraine will range from anywhere from negative 4.8 degrees Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius. What's for those in like the United States, they use the imperial system. That's 23 to about 35 degrees Fahrenheit. So it gets cold. It gets really cold, and that's the average temperature. Obviously, this year has been a year of extremes, so I'm terrified to find what winter has in store, especially since I live in the northern hemisphere in a place that gets a lot of snow usually. So I'm kind of terrified for that prospect, but I'm sure in Ukraine they may or may not be looking forward to it. The winter is really going to be a big deciding factor in which side is going to be more successful. The Russians do have special units, or have maintained special units from my understanding, where they actually have developed equipment to operate in places like Siberia, and they have troops that are really, meant for operating in places like Siberia and those heavy, those very heavy winter conditions, so that they may actually have troops that are more acclimated to fighting in the wintertime, which is what we saw during World War II, where the Russians were actually able to use the winter to their advantage. But overall, it's probably going to hold to a standstill. You're going to see a lot less movement, I think, on the front lines. I think it's pretty much going to fight itself to a standstill, and then that fighting season is probably going to open up once the snow starts to clear up and it starts getting warmer, but while the permafrost is still there, so that tanks aren't sinking in the mud. That's the Russians, to start the invasion, missed the window, I'd say, by about a week, 2 weeks. They really needed to get their objectives much faster, and they needed to probably have started much faster than when they did. Late February was a terrible time to start because once March hits, the Rasputitsa really starts setting in, and it's downhill from there. And that's exactly what you saw at the opening parts of the war. And Russia was at full strength then. Now Russia is demoralized and no longer at full strength, and we'll have to see how that plays out. They may be using it to resupply. Gar says both sides will dig in and strengthen their lines of defenses, essentially. But that's what you're seeing for the last 8 years, since 2014, really, is you're seeing them really just kind of digging in. This war is much more akin to World War I than most people realize. Modern 21st century war. The reason why World War I devolved into trench warfare is because wars that were fought simply a decade or two earlier were completely different on their level of destruction and the scale of killing and the efficiency of it. The invention of the machine gun really, and large-scale artillery movements and artillery doctrine really made it to where open cavalry, open field cavalry and maneuver warfare were no longer viable because people could be mowed down in waves. So that's why you see World War I develop into trench warfare. You see this conflict similarly do so. The fact is that our anti-armor weapons now mean that tanks can't break through defensive lines very easily. A single individual can destroy an entire multi-million-dollar tank. But it's the 21st century. War has become so deadly that you have to start going deeper underground to survive, and now we already see the trench warfare development, which we've seen here. The massive amounts of artillery usage, which already was in the Soviet doctrine. They heavily aligned themselves with artillery and mechanized warfare, but it's really that really plays into a replay of World War I, and we continue to see that on the front lines. You see that in the imagery, you see it in the trenches. And I think we're going to see it for some time to come. I think overall it will slow down. Precision strikes will be probably more prevalent than actual offensives. And I think that the wintertime will come where they're bolstering each other. So that way when the springtime comes, Ukraine is going to probably use the Rasputitsa to their advantage, while the Russians can no longer maneuver. And the Russians are probably going to use that time, that short window they have in permafrost, to get whatever gains they're really going to have and consolidate their holdings from there. That's kind of what I'm guessing, but it's a long way off, and this war could change very quickly between now and then. All it takes really, there is in every war, and with hindsight in 2020, you can really pinpoint the turning point of the war. The U.S. Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederate Army would never once again be able to fight on the Northern Territory, and they're always on the defense. World War II, you have 1942 in the Pacific, the Battle of Midway. That is the last time the Japanese fleet is ever really capable of conducting a major strike and major offensive actions. Past that, you're only seeing things like defensive measures, the Battle of Savo Island, the Battle of Surigao Strait, and so on and so forth. And you can really see that throughout really any major conflict where that turning point is. So we could see one of those in the meantime. It's very possible that the introduction of the HIMARS is that turning point with the massive amount of destructions. The heavyweight Russian logistics is already difficult enough. They are not very good. They weren't prepared logistically to begin with, and now they're losing ammunition depots, putting even more strain on their logistical systems. We could, in between now and even the winter, see a complete fault somewhere in the line. All it requires is the right gap to open up in the right place at the right time, where logistics have completely failed and the Russian troop morale is so low that Ukraine can exploit an area. And it very well could be the Kherson Oblast. It very well could be Zaporizhia. It could even be Donetsk. So there's a long way to go, and it's really too early to call and see. When we get later into the war and we start having to look at, that winter is really starting to set in, that's when we're probably going to start seeing and be able to make a better assessment of the situation. But the situation is just too fluid right now to make an accurate assessment. I'm just basing whatever assessment I have based off of, well, what have we seen before? Well, it's usually slowing down. As we move over towards Kherson, the Dorivka bridge was reportedly struck again. This is over the Dorivka bridge is over the Inhulets River, which flows into the Dnipro River. This is the Inhulets right here. This is Dorivka. It's just to the east of Kherson itself, and this bridge actually connects these two areas. It connects pretty much, this splits the Kherson offensive into two major sections. You have Kherson itself, which has Chernobivka, the Kherson International Airport, all of that wonderful jazz, and then this splits, and then you have the northern sector, which runs up towards the Dnipro Oblast and the Kiev Oblast and all of that. And so you can really split this for Novokakhovka and then the Kherson, so the Antonovsky. That is really what we're seeing here, and if you can't flow supplies one way or the other, if you're trying to take Kherson itself, they've already cut off the Antonovsky Bridge, and then also cutting off the Dorivka Bridge means that any supplies that come through Novokakhovka, because this is a dam and Ukraine does not want to destroy that dam, that's the only way to destroy this road. This crossing point, while at choke point, is still a valuable main supply route, or MSR. The Russians can push across this, and they have to cross the bridge here in Dorivka to resupply their western flank. They can't do that if it's destroyed, and they either have to pontoon across it, which we've seen them do, or they simply have to use a ferry, like they're doing across the Antonovsky Bridge area. So either way, destroying that outright is going to majorly impact their logistical capabilities and further degrade resistance that Ukrainian forces may be feeling. But go ahead and take a look. So while it's very hard, you can see what's happening here is those are anti-air systems. Those are anti-air batteries that have detected, and they are now launching anti-air systems back against a suspected HIMARS missile or incoming projectile. That was the outgoing missiles that you saw. This is very far away in the distance. I'm going to guess and say this person's probably on the other side of the city. But then you hear where, and you can see a slight flash where a missile has struck its target. So those anti-air defense systems did not intercept, and therefore the missile was still able to strike. And that has reportedly happened at least twice today. Over here, it's empty shelves in Kherson. I would hate to be a civilian in Kherson right about now. So the grocery store situation here is not very great for civilians. Just like everywhere else, the Russians aren't helping with anything. They are quite literally probably going to let these people die off and then repopulate with their own Russians. That's probably what's happening right about now. But here, the grocery store for the occupied civilians, most of the stores are pretty much just empty. They're being overcharged by the Russian occupational forces.
Вот так выглядят сейчас херсонские магазины. Это единственный, в котором более-менее еще хоть какой-то товар есть.
Почем клубника? 150. Вот лоточек или килограмм? Вот это килограмм.
Сколько мяса?
Девушка, смотрите, вот эта лопатка на кости 230, антрикоты 210, филейки, вся мякоть.
So as you can see, pretty much empty shelves, and everything now is going to be open markets between Ukrainian farmers and whoever's here. And that's what hasn't been stolen by the Russians, which we know they've done rather extensively. As we jump up here into Mykolaiv, the Russians shelled Mykolaiv once again. Pretty severely. We don't have any imagery from this today, but they have shelled Mykolaiv pretty severely. Quote, Russian occupiers shelled the city of Mykolaiv on August 5th. 22 people were injured, including a 13-year-old boy. Local residential buildings and private houses were damaged. And that's coming from Vitaly Kim, who is the head of the Mykolaiv Regional Military Administration. Quote, Russian occupiers fired missiles at the city of Mykolaiv on August the 5th. 21 people were injured, including one child. One citizen was killed. Russian occupiers used cluster shells banned by international conventions, and that's coming from Krylo Tymoshenko, who's the deputy head of the president's office. Why? So there's probably a need for some explanation. The cluster munitions thing is a nuance, and it's a technicality. So the United States is not a signatory, but more importantly for this directly, Russia nor Ukraine is a signatory of the Ottawa Convention, meaning they don't follow the Ottawa Convention. Cluster munitions and landmines are all still available for usage during war. The thing about it, however, is that cluster munitions are indiscriminate. And the use of an indiscriminate method of war within a highly populated civilian center is considered a war crime under the first protocol of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, which is the fourth Geneva Conventions. So, Protocol 1, which was adopted in 1977 of the Geneva Conventions, Articles 49 and 51. So, then the Russians pointed that out themselves at the United Nations. So, they are already doing it themselves, and that was one of the reasons why it was hilarious to try and read that. But what's not hilarious is the fact they continue to do it, and that's not the only thing they do. We've seen them use thermite as well in civilian concentrations and personnel, which is banned by the third protocol of the Geneva Conventions, adopted in 1980. And it's just overall terrible. There is no discrimination. Protocol 1, the whole point. So you have the 1949 Geneva Conventions. The whole point of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, which is actually only adopted in 1949, it was written in 1948. Fourth Geneva Conventions is reaffirmations of the first three conventions, but also it's also known as the Genocide Prevention or just the Genocide Conventions. This is written directly as a result of the atrocities of World War II and the Holocaust, in order to prevent something like the Holocaust and World War II from ever occurring again. The amount of loss of human life and suffering was just so impactful to literally everybody that they had to have another Geneva Conventions, because there is no way else to describe the Holocaust at that point in time. Genocide had to be coined as a term to describe what was happening. And so the protocols, in addition to that, follow up with how you conduct that war, how you conduct that warfare. Because since that point, in 1948, you have things like Korea and Vietnam, where a lot of things were impacting a lot of civilians. Vietnam would have been very fresh in everyone's minds in 1977 through 1980, and the usage of things like napalm, cluster munitions, and the heavy uses of landmine, which still plagues Vietnam to this very day, was very impactful. Same thing with Korea, where napalm was also used, as well as a large concentration of landmines, and it still affects the local populations there. So that is, so part of the first protocol of the Geneva Conventions, really what that is for military planning and military methodology. Where can you put your military locations, if possible, in order to prevent civilian losses? How do you plan to conduct attacks? How what methods you use, what weaponry you use, how you attack, how do you, requiring you to prevent civilian losses, prevent indiscriminate attacks. The Russians do not abide by this whatsoever in their military planning. You look no further than Mariupol to understand this. The 90% destruction rate of Mariupol, which is officially, according to the officials from Mariupol, 90% of Mariupol is completely destroyed and will have to be rebuilt. If it's still standing and hasn't collapsed at this point, it will have to be demolished. It will have to be rebuilt. It must be demolished and rebuilt. It is no longer structurally viable. 90% of the city. The first protocol of the Geneva Convention, just by examining it without being an attorney, mind you, I'm not an attorney in international law. I served in the military, so I generally have to understand this stuff. Not even specific. Just generally, it's just don't kill people for no apparent reason. And watch your fire. There seems to be little to no rules of engagement for the Russians, and they bombed the entire city of Mariupol indiscriminately. The usage of grad systems in civilian populations is one example alone. It's 40 dumbfire 122 millimeter Katyusha rockets that are fired from a BM-21 grad system. Just one. Look at the Battle of Severodonetsk. You have hundreds of grad systems being fired at Severodonetsk. That alone, as well as Mariupol and Lysychansk and Mykolaiv, should tell you that there is no considerations for the methodology of war. There is no planning or forethought that has gone into limiting civilian casualties. Even the Geneva Convention understands that military targets will end up in civilian population centers. The civilian population centers will be key strategic points. They allow for this. In fact, the Geneva Conventions explicitly state that the presence of civilians does not mean that it is not a meaningful target. But the destruction of that target on its impact on the war must outweigh the collateral loss of life and damage to civilian property. And the means in which you conduct that attack must limit itself to that military objective within a reasonable degree. The Russians don't do this at all. Mykolaiv, the destruction of Mykolaiv, the bombing of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, BAKHMUT. Are there military objectives possibly? Yeah. Probably. Venetia? But was the methodology worth it? No. Methodology didn't limit it at all. But that is it for everything inside of the country of Ukraine. But don't worry, we have more outside of the country of Ukraine. There is a lot of stuff happening all around the world. There's more conflicts and stuff that seem to have begun today. And there's also a lot of news in regards to the war effort here in Ukraine outside of the nation itself. So we're going to go ahead and roll right into the international news. And of course, we jump up here into Moscow, where the Russians are kissing China's ass. They are, man, are they kissing ass right now. It's bad. So USA hands off Taiwan. China, we will do this together. You're not welcome here. Like, oh man. And this comes immediately the day after we witnessed that that Chinese equipment was being shipped to Ukraine. And it was marked as Chinese military equipment from the PLA, or the People's Liberation Army. So we know that China is now supporting Russia, at least in a military sense, with supplies and equipment. We know that this is happening. But yeah, I mean, take a look. Also, remember, they're using students. Yes. So, yeah, needless to say, the Russians are really trying to get good with China right now. But it makes sense. They have very similar ideologies. And down here in Sochi, Putin actually met with President Erdogan of Turkey there in Sochi today. And he actually brought his dog with him, too. And they agreed to boost further cooperation and some ruble payments for gas, meaning that Turkey will allow gas payments and everything else to be done in rubles. JL, so China supply absolutely 100% confirmed then? I mean, as best of our knowledge, I'm not an intelligence official in the CIA or something, but when there's a bunch of Chinese military equipment sitting in Rostov-on-Don, I'm probably gonna, that's where we see that Russian equipment is being shipped in there for the offensives in the Donbass. I'm going to say that it is with a 95% solution confirmed as the Chinese are supplying the Russians militarily. That's pretty hard evidence to make up. That's really hard evidence to make up. That's not like going on War Thunder and putting on a reskin for your tank or something. Like, that's really hard to make up in real life. It's very hard to stage something like that. Because that is Chinese military equipment. Chinese military equipment isn't the same as everyone else's. Their Type 85 TAC 3, which is a Russia, is their main battle tank. It's a Chinese main battle tank for the PLA. It's similar enough that you would call it a T-90, but it's not a T-90. It's not. It's a Chinese knockoff of the T-90 with its own upgrades and variants. Their battle cruisers are basically exactly the same as Russian battle cruisers. A lot of their aircraft carriers, original aircraft carriers, were a lot of knockoffs of, say, the Soviet aircraft carriers. Their current ones are knockoffs of the Ford class aircraft carrier, with its own kind of hangar elevator, or its actual elevator decks are repositioned to meet how they want to do things. They're developing a 5th generation fighter that's basically a knockoff of the F-35. They have their own AK. They have their own everything. Their grenades or potato mashers. Their helicopter fleet. The Orca is about the only thing. The PO-8 Orca is about the only thing that I don't believe that's a design they've taken from anyone else. They're developing their own Javelin, but they do have their own helicopters that are designed after the Mi-8 helicopter. They are just it's just like anything else that you get from China. It's like they don't respect anyone's copyright laws, so they basically just rip everyone off. And their military is no different. Their military weaponry is just rip-offs of other nations. Like, the Chinese saw the F-35 and were like, we gotta have something like that, and so they built it. The Chinese saw that Russia developed hypersonic missiles, and they're like, we gotta have that, so they developed it. They saw in the war here in Ukraine that the Javelin was so effective, and they're like, we gotta have that. They saw the Ford carrier class, and they're like, we gotta have that, and so they built a carrier, which is actually I believe, undergoing sea trials right now. So it's not exactly the same. So when you're looking at it, you can tell if it's a Chinese vehicle or not. it's not perfectly a copy. It's just close enough. It's like knockoff Legos from China. You know, they will work, but they don't quite fit right. And that's pretty much it. But yeah, just take a look here in Sochi. Yet another meeting. This is expected, though. We were expecting this. They did say that they were going to meet in another month following the grain deal. So, once again, having those high-level meetings. You jump over here into Bulgaria. Bulgaria is shipping equipment to Ukraine. Bulgarian T-72s are being shipped over to them right now, and the country has also announced they will stop issuing tourist visas to Russians. We're, of course, getting this from Annexta. Yes, burning of a Russian passport. JL, I guess China really doesn't get it, I guess. If this info will be confirmed, I would start doing everything to undermine Chinese businesses on West and ASAP, bring all of the factories back to Western world. Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. I think once again, it rolls into, I talked on this a little bit last night, I think it rolls into the dire consequences for Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. They're conducting these military exercises, which are really flashy, but those in the long term don't matter. It just is a big show. I think what actually matters is that China now starts supporting the Russian Federation, which actually boosts their military capacity without tanking their economy with it, and actually it boosts their war capabilities. So I think that's the actual impact. I don't them shooting a bunch of areas around Taiwan but not actually attacking Taiwan is just a big flashy show. It's a show of force, and that's it. That's all it really is. It's just a show off that they have this big military and they could use it if they wanted to. But they also don't have enough amphibious vehicles to actually do an invasion of Taiwan, so it wouldn't matter. And Taiwan would be an utter disaster for China. They would be an utter disaster. But I think the actual consequences were that they're going to support Russia in this endeavor. They already align politically. They have a lot of anti-Western sentiments. They're expansionist powers. They're willing to do it by force. They both have large economies and large industries that were heavily utilized by Western nations. For China, it was the United States. For Russia, it was Europe. When it came to Russia's energy sector and the commodities for China. JL, let's be honest. Even trade blockade caused by China and Taiwan or USA war, are literally 10 times worse in results than the war in Ukraine. Yeah, 100%. China has a military of 2.5 million troops. But I would guess to say they're probably less trained than American troops are. But it would be disastrous for them. I don't even think that Taiwan truly would need U.S. assistance. Honestly, I don't think they honestly would. Their entire island is nothing but a big giant nest of machine guns and bunkers and and tank traps and hidden air bases and like. Their mountains are essentially hollowed out. Like I don't think it would be like Iwo Jima or Okinawa during World War II times about like 1,000. It would be terrible. There is no amount of troops you could pour into that would make the gains worth it. There is no, and also the Taiwan, like the businesses that run those very fancy microchip factories that everyone talks about is the real reason behind them wanting Taiwan. They already said that they would sabotage their own plants if China even tried to invade Taiwan. They would sabotage them so that the way they would render them inoperable completely. So China wouldn't even get that. It would just be a big middle finger to China, even if they took the island, and finally did that historical inevitability that they talk about it wouldn't be good for them. It wouldn't. And I don't even think the U.S. would really have to be involved, but the U.S. would get involved, and it would be pretty nasty, yeah. JL once again says, I mean, look what happened during COVID. It would be severely much worse, even taking out the military aspect out of equation. No, probably not really. I mean, the United States, it would suck for a couple of years, I would say. But the United States has proven, and we maintain enough reserves when it comes to our resources, that the United States would be just fine, ultimately. It would suck for a couple of years, and there'd be a big economic depression, but the factories would have to come home. They would have to come back to the United States. Otherwise, their businesses will go bankrupt, right? And these guys are still going to want to make money. And you see that moving away. There's going to be some microchip factories that are going to be built in Ohio that I know of. And there's a bunch of stuff that's happening in the United States regarding that, because actually the rise, because of the buildup of the Chinese economy, is actually, and however, the trade screw-ups and the logistical screw-ups that were caused by COVID-19 and now the war in Ukraine, a lot of manufacturers are actually looking at bringing business back into the United States because it's actually more profitable in some aspects now to do so. And so the United States have proven that we can literally outproduce literally everyone in the world. It just takes time to get the factories back up and running, which would be happening. And an invasion in the United States is impractical by any military power in the world. So the United States would be fine. It would suck. It would definitely suck for a while. But 1941, the United States is in the worst economic depression in the world and literally took the world with it. And by 1943, we're operating at maximum capacity. We're 97% of everything produced in the United States is going to a war effort, and we're outproducing every single military power combined. And then the Pacific Fleet is larger than every warring power combined alone, let alone the Atlantic Fleet with it. So, I mean, the United States still has that capability. In the wise words of Admiral Yamamoto, immediately following the attack on Pearl Harbor, I fear that if China was to attack Taiwan, they would be uttering the words, I fear that we have not done nothing but awaken a sleeping giant. As we jump up here into Poland, Poland is going to buy its latest weapons from South Korea. Poland is going to buy 48 FA-50 fighter jets, first installment of 180 K2 Black Panther tanks and howitzers from South Korea. The Warsaw's defense minister was quoted as saying on Friday, as the country strengthens its army because of the war in Ukraine. We want peace, so we must prepare for war. The Polish armed forces must be so strong that the aggressor could not decide to attack, said the defense minister Maurice of Boskowsk. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce this. I'm so sorry. The first batch of 180 K2 tanks is to be compensated for over 240 Soviet combat vehicles transferred to Ukraine to fight the Russian invasion. In total, that is the supply of about 1,000 tanks, as well as 648 self-propelled howitzers and 48 FA-50 fighters. This is the largest military export deal in South Korean history. JL says the part of least developed countries around the world would suffer. USA is pretty much self-sustainable and has having a huge economy. Yeah, pretty much. The United States is just kind of lethargic. We're not really excited about a whole lot. We really don't have to be. We're a pretty big country. We have a lot of natural resources that we manifest destiny into existence. Which I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying it happened. Alaska, like you have to understand, like Nevada owns less than 50% of its actual state. Everything else is U.S. Bureau of Land Management. Everything else out west, the amount of land that's controlled by the federal government and is like national forest. Like every time you see, national forest, Medicine Bone Route National Forest, Bridger Teton National Forest, as long as it's not a national park for preservation, the Helena Lewis and Clark National Forest. Sure, it's great for trails. What are these actually there for? To be stripped. All of these national forests, they're there because it's about conservation, but sustainable usage. They're there to go there, they're there to have lumberjacks come through, cut down all the trees, replant trees there so that they have a sustainable harvest of trees, and then they now have those resources to be used. I mean, we could be the largest oil exporter in the world, but we hold a lot of oil in reserve and choose not to pump it. Saudi Aramco does the same thing. They don't pump to maximum capacity. It'd be dumb to do that. You'd render your reserves low. But the United States certainly could. We can boost manufacturing. I mean, people don't realize the United States is not operating at maximum capacity whatsoever. I'd say we're operating at like a 25% capacity, honestly, with our economy. The United States could very easily turn around. Remember, kids, don't believe everything on the internet, though, including myself, as I am not a trained professional in any regards when it comes to journalism. I just think I'm really good at it. But don't believe everything you hear on the internet. A French scientist, Etienne Klein, tweeted a photo of a slice of chorizo against a black background, commenting, "Photo of the Proxima Centauri, the closest star to the sun, located 4.2 light years from us. It was taken by the James Webb Telescope. This level of detail, a new world is revealed day after day." Many people believe Klein because he is a director of research at Atomic Energy Commission. Klein soon cleared up the confusion. According to contemporary cosmology, no object relating to Spanish charcuterie exists elsewhere than Earth. I feel obliged to specify that this tweet showing an alleged snapshot of Proxima du Centaur was a form of amusement. Let us learn to distrust arguments from authority as much as spontaneous eloquence from certain images. Wow. Wow. Alrighty. Once again, don't believe everything you see on the internet. We try to be professional here and we try to do our research, but at the end of the day, we're not experts on everything. So please, whenever we're talking about something, especially when you're asking questions and I'm giving my assessment or my comments or something, please understand I am an expert in certain things. That doesn't make an expert perfect. I will say that. But also, nobody is perfect. We're simply trying to do the best we can. So I always implore that you do your own research, and we always try, if we have something that you can get more info, we do try to add it onto here for you. But I highly recommend you do your own research and what's going on as well. And if you find a topic interesting, yeah, go dive in depth with it 100%. Because there's a lot more stuff that I don't know about that I try and discuss here every day. One of those being volcanic eruptions, actually. Oh man, this is gonna be so bad. This is Iceland's Fagradalsfjall volcano, which has erupted. I'm not saying that again. The volcano has erupted. It is located on a peninsula about 30 kilometers from Reykjavik. I do know how to pronounce that. The eruption follows immense seismic activity over the past few days. It's considered to be relatively small due to its location. There's a low threat to populated areas or critical infrastructure. However, it is possible that pollution can be detected due to the gas release, so people are advised from visiting the site of the eruption. I don't know about you, but if there was an eruption from a volcano, that's cool and all. I'm not hiking my ass to that volcanic eruption. Nope. Seen too many movies about Yellowstone to care. Not like cool Yellowstone, like it's a wonderful national park, or there's like a bunch of drama going on between a rancher. I'm talking about like Yellowstone eruption type movies for me to actually want to go. And by the way, Yellowstone erupting, for those that don't know, if the cauldron erupts in Yellowstone, which is actually overdue to do so, it's a world-ending event. And we're actually overdue for, I think it's 400,000 years or something for a Yellowstone eruption. But if the cauldron actually erupts, it's a super volcano, and it will essentially destroy a third of America instantaneously. It will cover the rest of the United States and North America in about 3 to 9 feet of ash, and then it will also blot out the sun for at least a decade, which would plummet temperatures, starting another ice age. Yeah, Yellowstone going off, a really bad thing. This volcano, not such a bad thing, but still pretty catastrophic considering the pollution. But let's go ahead and take a look. Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the risk is low. Yeah, I see lava. You know what? I've always thought about going like and sticking something in lava. I think that would be really fascinating. Riley, another caldera forming eruption is theoretically possible, but is very unlikely in the next 1,000 or even 10,000 years. Scientists have also found no indication of an imminent smaller eruption of lava in more than 30 years of monitoring. And that is in regards to Yellowstone. So, yes, are we overdue? Yes. I'm not trying to incite panic over Yellowstone. It's just some very interesting facts. In fact, Yellowstone eruptions, you can actually tell when they are anywhere you are in North America, because there are entire levels of sediment that have an ash level to them, from where ash has formed into a rock layer. So it's actually pretty cool. I've never been to Yellowstone personally. It's it's the top of my list of places I want to go for national parks. I would also like to go see a glacier at some point in my life, but I actually would love to go to Yellowstone. That, and it's huge. I've been to Yosemite, which is probably hands down the most beautiful park, but yeah, so if anyone wants to get me free tickets or a free way to go to Yellowstone, wink wink, hint hint, would love to do so. But other than that, moving down here into the Middle East, we've got a lot of developments in the Middle East, and it's not good. So something big is coming, and that is because Israel's mobilizing 25,000 soldiers from their reserves, and troops are also being drawn into the Gaza Strip, which we're getting ready to get into here very shortly. By the way, for those that don't know, no, those are not invasion markings, but for those that don't know, that's actually a Merkava, and that is my favorite tank in the world, and it is probably one of the coolest tanks ever built in history. The Merkava 3 and 4 is perfection in a main battle tank. Like, seriously, probably one of the greatest military inventions in history. It has a high profile. It has some weak points, but as an all-around main battle tank for just like for what it's designed to do, Merkava hands down. Also, it's probably one of the coolest looking main battle tanks ever produced in history. But that's not really what we're talking about now, is it? It's just a personal fascination of mine, having been my job for a while. No, the main topic of tonight is, when it comes to the Middle East, is this, and that is that Israeli forces have launched attacks against Palestinian forces. The Israeli armed forces have announced the launch of Operation Dawn against Palestinian forces in the Gaza Strip. The reason for the threats is the Islamic Jihad group which demanded that Israel stop arresting its activists and release those arrested. At the moment, airstrikes have been carried out on one of the houses in Gaza, as a result of which the head of the Islamic Jihad military wing, Tazir al-Jabari, was killed and 20 more people were injured. Hamas and the Eid issued new threats against Israel, warning in advance that they would be launching more rockets towards Israel. A video of the IDF airstrike on Gaza has been released. At the moment, it is known that 7 civilians were killed, including a child, and 44 were injured. Yeah, that's an apartment building.
هذا القصف
Rockets incoming. The Islamic State militants began pre-announcing shelling of Israeli territory from the Gaza Strip. By tradition, the Palestinian militants warned in advance that they would launch rockets at 2100 tonight, which would have been at roughly 9 p.m. local time. According to updated data, as a result of Israeli airstrikes on a residential area in Gaza, 9 civilians were killed and about 55 injured. Among the victims were women and children. You can see some of these rocket launches here. And what you're able to see here is not just incoming rockets, but that is also the Iron Dome defense system, which is one of, if not the most accurate air defense system in the world. The IDF has launched retaliatory strikes in the Gaza Strip, the target of which was, as stated, the sites of launches of the Palestinian rockets. The Islamic State claims that 100 were fired, but no one was injured. We can see the results of some of these strikes ongoing. Needless to say, things in Israel and Palestine are not going very well right now. So, conflicts in total. Wow. So we have Russia and Ukraine. We have Turkey and Syria. We have Turkey and PKK in Iraq. We have Azerbaijan and Armenia. We have possibly Iran jumping in on that. We have the Islamic State operating all through here and in Africa. We have rebels in Mali versus the military junta. We have, luckily, it's calmed down somewhat, but the DRC and Rwanda are having some tensions. We have the Houthi rebels in Saudi Arabia here in Yemen, which have now calmed down. We have the Islamic State in Egypt, of course. We have Palestine and Israel. We have We have the TTP, or the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, and other air groups operating within the Karachi region of Pakistan, fighting against Pakistani forces. We have the small minority Muslim population which is up against the larger majority Hindu population in violent protests in India. We have China and Taiwan, China the United States, China South Korea, China Japan, and China versus Australia, Papua New Guinea, and New Zealand. Wow. And possibly China versus India, because there's a lot of tension there too. And also we have the cartels in Mexico and the cartels in Central and South America. Wow. Isn't it just a time to be alive? There's a lot of conflicts ongoing. There's a lot of just bad stuff happening. Wow. It's real. We don't, I try to color code this to some degree. Like the black's the Islamic State, like we have, red for Russia, we have blue for like NATO and allied powers, we have yellow for Ukraine, we have brown for the PKK and the Syrian armed forces, and we have, light gray for Turkish and pro-Turkish militias. I'm running out of colors. There are too many conflicts to actually keep track of in total. Like, my maps does not have enough colors to actually depict what's happening in an understandable way. But this is not good. This is really bad. This is really, really bad, to say the least. Palestine and Israel have never gotten along. Palestine was his own country, and then in 1948, because of the Holocaust, the United Nations basically poofed Israel into existence, and allowed the Jewish people to go back to what they consider their homeland. Which, of course, Palestine, being its own country, was not so happy about, and neither were any of the Arab countries in this region, all of which essentially went to war against Israel several times over and got demolished by the Israelis, including the Six-Day War. So not a good, but the tensions between Israel and Palestine are still there. There's a lot of political sentiments regarding Palestine. Israel has not been the greatest to Palestine, admittedly. Riley says, I just want more good news. Yeah, this is why we go out of our way to find good news every day, because this is just getting depressing. It's just one war after another. It's just one bad conflict after another. There's just not good stuff happening in the world. And we see it here again. I mean, here in Iraq, the residents demand justice for an unwarranted killing. The residents of Abu Ghraib district attacked a motorcade of the Minister of Defense of Iraq, demanding that he punish the soldiers who killed a shepherd. As it became known, it's not the militias who were accused of the murder, but an officer of the government army and his entourage who wanted to buy a sheep from the deceased, but did not agree on the price. Therefore, they killed him and stole the flock. Wow.
الدفاع يضرب بالأحذية. وزير الدفاع
Also, I'm really surprised here, considering this is the Minister of Defense of Iraq, that the Iraqi military didn't just open fire, because they have done that quite often in the past. Just look a couple years back at Nasiriyah. They did it there. They also have done it in Baghdad recently, though most of those are just opposition political forces, paramilitary wings and stuff. But it's Iraq's not very good right now. Iraq is not doing so hot. You have a Turkish incursion in the north, in the Dahak province, which just killed a bunch of civilians. You already had political instability. You have Iranian instability mingling, whatever you want to call it, in Iraq and political affairs. You have Sadr, who I am amazed hasn't been assassinated. Amazed that he hasn't been assassinated by anybody, including the United States. I know we've tried. The fact that Sadr is still alive is a miracle. He runs the Mahdi Army, by the way, in case you didn't know, and the Peace Brigades. Don't look up Peace Brigades. It brings up a whole other group, but the Peace Brigades are actually just the Mahdi Army renamed. But they're a paramilitary wing of the Sadr political faction. Like, there's just so many things happening in Iraq that's just not good. Baghdad is just a dumpster fire right now, with protests and all sorts of stuff. So it's not a good time. In Kabul, we have 3 different things happening at this point, 2 of which are along the same line. So first of all, down with the USA. The Taliban harshly took revenge on Americans for the murder of Aman al-Zawahiri in Kabul, driving local Afghans to a demonstration. Why they're demonstrating against the fact that we killed a leader of Al-Qaeda? In fact, the leader of Al-Qaeda? The number 2 man behind Osama bin Laden, who helped plan the 9/11 terror attacks? No idea. But they are. But they're mostly upset that we conducted a strike in Kabul, which to them they say it breaks the Doha agreements. But yeah, they drove people to a demonstration, which I guess is a lot better. As you can see here, down with USA, which I guess is a lot better than what it used to be, where they were literally killing each other. But yeah, not yeah. But the Islamic State also attacked a Shia crowd here in Kabul today. In Kabul, there were 2 explosions. The first was at a Shiite mosque of Imam Bakr, and the second was in the 6th district of the city. The target apparently was Shiite ceremonies. According to the Taliban, 8 people were killed, 18 injured. Local sources reported 49 injured. However, the constant underestimation of the number of victims of the Taliban has kind of become the norm. They suppress a lot of information when it comes to local press.
منطقه سرکاری قلعه شده ناحیه ششم منتهی شده.
And there's the Islamic State taking claim for the attack. They said the Islamic State has claimed responsibility for bombing the Shia crowd in western Kabul that killed at least 20 people, according to the Islamic State. Local Khazar Shiites who witnessed the attack reported more than 40 casualties. Once again, the Taliban is very upset by U.S. actions. The head of the Taliban Defense Ministry, Mullah Yaqub, said that there are many countries that are more hostile to the United States than the Taliban, but they are officially recognized. He also added that the recognition of the Taliban regime is also in the interest of the United States. It looks like a desperate move, especially against the background of the U.S. airstrike on Kabul. It's interesting that Afghanistan received $40 million a couple of days before the assassination of Zawahiri, and another $40 million a day after Biden's statement, which was apparently became the reward for his elimination. So, very interesting indeed. Jump over here, over by Taiwan. And this is a general, very, very general location as to where this is at. So, nobody on Earth but the commanding officer on board the carrier and a carrier strike group actually knows where that carrier strike group is. The actual locations of carrier strike groups is very heavily guarded. So, this is a very general vicinity. It's in this general area. So, but the U.S. Navy is going to be staying near Taiwan. A U.S. naval strike force led by the USS Ronald Reagan has been ordered to remain in the Taiwan area to monitor the ongoing situation. This is actually very common. So that is really, really common, actually. When my brother, actually my older brother, served in the U.S. Navy, and he was stationed at Naval Air Station Yokosuka, Japan, as a meteorologist and oceanographer. So this was back in 2000, I want to say 2004 to 2007, 2008. And his job was actually to do this. His job was to study weather patterns and the ocean patterns, weather-wise and climate-wise, in the Sea of Taiwan, in the South China Sea, and so that carrier strike groups could park themselves between China and Taiwan every single time that China decided it wanted to take over the island of Taiwan or threatened to take over the island of Taiwan. The reason being is because if you get so close within a U.S. naval carrier strike group, it's actually an act of war. So that is why we do that. We park, because China, whenever they threaten to take over Taiwan, they threaten to send every rowboat, every fishing boat, every amphibious vehicle, every aircraft carrier. Like, if they got it and it floats, if they have the door that Rose sat on after the sinking of the Titanic, they will use it to send troops to Taiwan. That is what they threaten. Jack could have lived, by the way. And on top of... So, we park a naval carrier strike group between them to make sure that the two kids play nice. And that's basically what we do. And we've done it for decades now. And just no one talks about it. So, while it's big news right now, it's not really big news. It's just interesting to note. Obviously, they're not going to park it right between Taiwan and China because all of this area is like a free fire zone for Chinese artillery right now. And putting your carrier strike group in the middle of an impact area is not very smart as a military officer. So I'm going to guess and say they're probably out north of the island somewhere, over in the East China Sea, or in the Philippine Sea. But yeah, they're out there. So this happens more frequently than you think about. You just never hear about it. I didn't even know that we did that until my brother had told me all the way back then. You know, that was probably, while he was still in, when he came home for Christmas, when I learned about that. So, but yeah, that's the thing. That is a thing. And we actually don't have anything ongoing in Africa right now. I guess there's way too much stuff happening in Israel. But I'm sure that there is stuff happening. It's just our sources are always limited. And if you have more sources, we're happy to accept those too. And we're still always trying to expand it. I think we're up to over 300 now, I want to say. Somewhere like 200, anywhere from 200 to 300 right now. I think I have 250 that I follow. But yeah, but we're always trying to expand that, and might even look at maybe getting another researcher in the future. We'll see. As we jump over here into North America, we actually jump over here to Washington, D.C. The Biden administration is reportedly going to be announcing another $1 billion aid package for Ukraine. Rumored at this point is that it will include munitions for the HIMARS, NASAMS, surface-to-air missile systems, ammunition, and as many as 50 M113 armored medical transports. And this is all coming from Reuters, so if you guys want to go check out their full article on that. It wouldn't surprise me. The M113 is also a little bit of an older armored personnel carrier, but it would be very useful to the Ukrainians, less so than the United States, which at this point we have better stuff. The M113 has been in service with the United States since Vietnam, so it's better served somewhere else. I think we have better things at this point, but very good to see nonetheless. And if, like I said, if you guys want to check out that, you can go to Reuters and give them a look. And so, I'm actually going to jump over here to Melbourne, where a single-cell studies offer a new view of how HIV infections persist. Curing HIV remains one of the most formidable challenges when it comes to medicine. I mean, there's no real way to cure it unless you get a bone marrow transplant, which we actually just reported on. The 4th person ever got one in California, and was successfully cured. This is the 4th person in history to be cured of it. But that's very expensive. It's very time consuming. It's very risky, and it's usually they also have underlying issues, other issues that require a bone marrow transplant to begin with, such as cancer. But what they're checking out in part is that the cells that hold the DNA in the chromosomes persist in the face of very powerful drugs and immune responses. A research team has now isolated single cells from the viral reservoirs and characterized their gene activity, suggesting potential new cure strategies. Basically, they can take a single cell of the HIV virus that has infected that cell, and they can test on it, and they can see what kills it and what doesn't. And basically what this is going to do is now suggesting a new cure with these new cure strategies. The new work uses the technique that isolates the single infected cells as tiny amounts of blood move through the 3 microfluid devices. In essence, the device push the blood through the channels in microchips that trap individual cells in droplets, allowing them to be cut open so that the instruments can read their genetic material. Scientists hope that using this sensitive gene assay, they can help find a tiny subset of reservoir cells to harbor silent HIV infection so that it will be easier to cure. If you want to check out more on this and probably a little bit easier of a read than what I can give you, you can go to science.org, who has an entire article on this. I make it probably sound really boring, but I also don't know what I'm talking about. If I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to this level of stuff. But basically what they're saying is they are able to isolate infected cells, look at their genetic makeup, see what they're more or less resistant to, and be able to basically use that information as they conduct tests and research and see what kind of things will kill the HIV virus, and therefore they can use that to cure people, and they can develop new cure methods that doesn't require an entire bone marrow transplant, which is pretty awesome. And as we jump over here into Canada, this is coming from London, Canada, which is in the Ontario area. Researchers have achieved the world's first international holographic teleportation. No, they did not actually teleport themselves. So I want to make that clear. They didn't actually fully teleport themselves. But it's a hologram. So basically, someone like Emperor Palpatine themselves onto, someone else. Where you're sitting there. Watch Kenobi, please. It's an amazing show. Especially the last episode. But anyway, on the afternoon of July 27th, a small group of students from the Western Institute for Space Exploration, Western Space, gathered to witness take part in the world's first international holoport demonstration. They transported one person from Alabama to London, Ontario, and then each of the students here on the project were able to instantly holoport themselves in holographic form down to Huntsville, Alabama. The team is exploring the way this futuristic technology can be used in the real world, whether it's for people communicating or providing assistance and medical care to remote areas, or even in the International Space Station. The possibilities are only just kind of beginning to be understood. Please watch Star Wars if you've never had the idea of what holograms could be used for. Awesome phone calls. I would love to be able to just hologram myself into existence somewhere and talk to somebody. That would be fantastic. But yeah, no kidding. They literally became holograms somewhere. That's fantastic. That's fascinating. I want this technology just so I can hologram myself somewhere. K-Sen says, I understand they're striving to teleport themselves, to teleport out of Ontario. If you don't live in Toronto, I am so sorry. in my job, I actually have to ship things to Canada, and let me tell you, that is really difficult because if you're not shipping it to Toronto, which I normally don't, I'm normally shipping it to places like London, or I'm shipping it to places like Aurelia or Prince Edward or Kingston or something. It's never to Toronto. I never get that lucky. Thorndale is a big one, which is right here. Riley says, or Alabama. Alabama sucks. People from the South, everybody. But it's difficult. So yeah, it sucks. And also, if you've ever been to Alabama, unless you're in Birmingham or Huntsville or Mobile, which I've heard Mobile ain't all that great either. Man, I'm sorry. I've been down there. I've driven through there quite a bit. Not my cup of tea. I'm sorry. Also, the humidity. You guys can keep that. It was 100% humidity here, and you can still keep that. But other than that, that's actually all the news for the day. That's everything we have going on, both in Ukraine and internationally. That's a lot of stuff. A lot of big stuff happening, like I said early, when we were starting. A lot of stuff about war and a lot of stuff about conflicts that are starting. I mean, we have a conflict starting in Israel. Well, a conflict heating back up in Israel, I should probably better say. I think that's probably better put. Obviously, the BAKHMUT offensive seems to have started. We have the main effort. We also have a supporting effort that really seems to ring in there. I think we're going to see more echelons of that come on. I think we're going to have... I think Solidar will turn into a supporting effort too. Or it might be probably, I would say, the rightmost flank of the main effort. As they push towards BAKHMUT. I would expect Slavyansk probably to fall back on. And I'm still waiting on responses regarding the bet as to whether or not I'm right or not regarding that. And remember to keep all of this for charity, and please keep it reasonable. I'm not rich. Please keep it reasonable. But speaking of charities, thank you for supporting the channel, but even more so, thank you for supporting the charities we have listed in the description. That's really what this is about. We're never doing super chats on the channel, and we are never pushing merchandising on this channel. Everything, 100% of everything we do is for charity and charity alone. We want to be able to help people. We want to be able to help the very people that are being affected by the news that we deliver here every single day, whether that's through natural disasters or the conflicts that are ongoing throughout the world. If you check out in the video description, you're going to see a ton of different links down there, and we always want to add more. So if you have some, jump on our Discord and let a staff member know. If you have an organization, shoot us a link to their website. We want to be able to vet them independently and add them to this stream, as well as our website and our Discord. But check them all out and show some love to all of them. Not just the stuff for Ukraine. Ukraine is the big topic, but it has the spotlight. Also remember to give stuff to things like the people that are suffering in Ethiopia and Somalia who have had their rations cut because of the war in Ukraine. They've been suffering from collateral hunger. They already weren't in a great situation. They're ongoing through the worst drought in 40 years. 90% of Somalia is dry. 90% of people in the Tigray region require humanitarian assistance just for survival. So please be sure to go and check those out. And we want to be able to fill all 5,000 characters of our description with links for just like organizations, for humanitarian efforts, for helping people. 80% or more of all of your donations that you give to these organizations go to their programs and actually helping people. It's one of the things that we vet for. So please make sure that if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, then help us grow the channel so that way we can make an even bigger impact. Give us a like and subscribe. Let your friends know about us. Join us on our community on our Discord. And come hang out with us. There's a lot of great people. We have topics and discussions for everywhere in the world. That's really active. So active I can't keep up with all of them actually at this point, which is nice. But yeah, I mean, come and join us. Let your friends know about us, because overall, ultimately, the more people that are here, the more people that come and enjoy the news the way that we do it and present it, then ultimately the more people that will be here to give to these organizations, and the bigger of an impact we can have as a community. And that's really what this is all about. But I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of your Friday night. I hope that you guys have a wonderful Saturday, and we will see you guys once again tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. Remember to please be safe. I hope that your friends and your family remain safe, and if not, I really do truly hope you find that safety and security in the very near future. But hopefully we will see you guys back here once again tomorrow. My name is Paul from the New News, and have a fantastic rest of your night and the rest of your Saturday, everybody.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлепуємо. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом, даже танки и бочок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 000 лет. Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your double and shove it up your wrinkled butt. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your sky. Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Ідіть нахуй.